This morning, as I was reading the Bible in my time with the Lord, I saw something in Psalm 135 which got my attention, and I want to share some thoughts with you concerning that. Now, understand as I begin, I'm talking to people who call themselves Christians, people that don't serve God, people that make no effort to put Him anywhere in priority in their lives, will receive nothing from this devotion. This is specifically to Christians, people that come to church on a regular basis, people that, if you ask them, would say, yes, I am a follower of Jesus. Because within that group, there tends to be a differentiation between levels of commitment to the Lord. You have those who are genuinely committed to following Jesus, who wake up in the morning and effectively say, God, what will you have me do today? And then they, as the Holy Spirit leads them, live that way. They are genuinely committed to the Lord. And then you have those who do their own thing. If they get in trouble, they pray. If they need something, they might seek the Lord. But overall, their life is lived for themselves. And so they give verbal assent to the idea that God is in control. But the way they live their life actually turns out differently. And so something like what's going on in our nation right now happens, where in essence the foundations are pulled out from underneath us and we don't know which way to turn. And at that point that's when you see the difference between these two groups of people, these two groups of Christians coming to the forefront. For those who are genuinely following the Lord, whose commitment to Him is from their heart and it's real. Times like this, although they may be difficult, and although times like this may stretch their faith, those people wind up going deeper into their experience with the Lord, because that's the way they've been living their life all along. And so a crisis like the one we're going through becomes an opportunity for them to simply extend the foundations they've already placed deeper into the rock of salvation. But on the other hand, those who say they're Christians, claim to follow Jesus, but whose lives don't actually show much evidence of that, this kind of a crisis becomes something extremely difficult, in the sense that they haven't really established their foundation in the Lord. And so when the trouble hits, they're easily swept off their feet and they don't know which way to turn. I was reading this morning in Psalm 135, and I've been reading in the Psalms for several months now during my devotional time with the Lord. And I ran across something which talks about the way in which we tend to put our faith in the wrong things. Let me read to you in verse 15 of Psalm 135 and all the way through verse 18, talking about idols. The idols of the nations are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. So the idea there is that the idols that people were worshiping in the day that this was written, these were things that people had fashioned themselves. And although today we don't physically bow down to statues made of precious metals or stone or wood, yet by the same token, we do have idols, things that we worship, things that are important to us. And in fact, if you want to define what an idol is, no matter what time of history you live in, an idol is anything that you put above God. So in this case, the people around Israel, and in some cases the people in Israel, unfortunately, had built these idols. They were the work of men's hands. But here was the problem. When you needed an answer, when you needed to hear from God, when you needed spiritual strength, the idol would not help you. That's what you see when you go on to verse 16. This is talking about the idols. They have mouths, but they do not speak. Eyes they have, but they do not see. They have ears, but they do not hear. Nor is there any breath in their mouths. So you go to the idol looking for an answer, and there is no answer. And again, even though we don't have physical idols that we're worshiping today, the things that we've pursued outside of God, whatever's more important to us than God, when a crisis hits, that idol that you thought was so important winds up being utterly powerless to help you. And what happens then, verse 18, those who make them are like them. So is everyone who trusts in them. Your idol is not going to be a source of anything for you except disheartening news and discouragement. There's no blessing there. There's no spiritual strength there. We're caught in a time right now where we have a lot of questions and we have a lot of unanswered ideas that are floating around out there, that things that can't be answered right now because we just don't know. And we're in a time of testing. And right now we're seeing the difference between, again, those who serve God wholeheartedly and those who serve idols. Claim to be Christians, claim to love God, and yet their foundation is weak. And what happens? I want to jump back to verse 14 because there's, I believe, a distinction made here in this verse between these two groups of people. For the Lord will judge his people. That, in case, of course, was talking about Israel as the nation. And we know for sure, because we know the history of Israel from the Old Testament, that not everybody in Israel was serving God. We know that some were. We know that some were not. And so during the time of testing, during the time of struggle and trial, the Lord judges his people. But the rest of the verse says this, and he will have compassion on his servants. There's two groups of people being identified here. You've got the people, God's people, Israel, the group. But within that larger group, there's a smaller group, the ones who are actually the servants of God. The identifying mark of a servant is that they don't act on their own. They don't come up with their own initiatives. They don't follow their own leading. A servant did what his or her master told him or her to do. A servant, his function, her function, was to carry out the will of their master. That's what I want you to get a hold of here. And this is the reason when things are going well, when there isn't a crisis, when there isn't a time of trouble on every side. This is why you want to serve God with everything in you. This is why you want to have a commitment to the Lord that is 100% founded upon your loyalty toward and love for Jesus. Because times of testing will come. Because times of judgment will come and things are going to be shaken. And at that point, if your foundation isn't strong, it's going to collapse. Or at least you're going to struggle much more than you need to. And yet for those who serve the Lord, whose life is built around following his leadership, this is also a time of testing, but not in the same way. It's actually a time for a purification of our faith, when that which we have committed to him becomes even more grounded in the fact that we trust in the Lord. The Lord will judge his people, and he will have compassion on his servants.